Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao, the host of Pod TV's World Edition, now streaming on the Roku TV network. A game changing event, as we are now on national and international television. On this show, we welcome you from around the world to talk about global affairs, innovation, a focus on the war in Ukraine, and continuing our discussion of what we're going to do now as we emerge out of this pandemic in a new phase and whether we will get back to a new normal and what that new normal will look like. Over the next few weeks, we will be planning to have special guests that we can bring in. But today, I want to begin my monologue talking about the sleeping giant which has awoken Europe. This weekend, I was doing some reading of New York Times articles and perusing a little bit of my history books as I prepare my commentary every week. And I began to realize that Europe's assertive response to Russia's invasion is really something that is relatively new over the last few years of what we have seen from Europe. It is now Europe, which is, yes, united in its quest to fight for democracy with the United States of America. Up until now, Europe has been more passive, focusing more on their economic power, not their military strength. America and the United States has actually provided more money and more resources for security, along with NATO. But now, Vladimir Putin's aggressive invasion of Ukraine and his behavior is forcing Europe to unite. Europe's doing a lot right now. They're imposing tough sanctions on Russia. They're sending ammunition and weapons. They've committed to work to fight Russia. And even Germany and France have asked Putin to begin ceasefire talks. All of this means that the democratic recession that we've been could be on the mend if Europe continues to remain united. They're basically sending a message that democracy matters, that authoritarian governments cannot stand. And this invasion of Ukraine has awoken the sleeping giant, and they seem more united than ever. Think about it. Europe's inaction, as I look at history, was largely resulting after World War II, where basically Germany leaned towards pacifism. And the European Union, many countries, different countries, were often divided, different languages, different ethnic groups. They did have a common currency. And these divisions actually became apparent recently with Britain's exit from the European Union, which is known as Brexit. But now, things are different. Over the long run, a revitalized Europe could help renew a wounded global order led by a democratic West. It can give us strength in America, the United States of America, to take more of our resources, which we've been devoting to security in Europe, and focus on countering the rising superpower China and the Asia-Pacific region. As the world's second largest economy, Europe could leverage its wealth to counter threats to itself and democracy abroad. And the EU can continue to play a critical role in that. I'll end my monologue with a final thought, and I've said this on this show before. After the Soviet Union's fall in 1991, we saw a complete acceleration of democracies around Eastern Europe. They embraced democracy from Bulgaria to Lithuania to many other countries that defected from the Soviet Union, including Ukraine, Belarus, and others. And a new world order emerged. We thought democracy was here forever. Well, now democracy seems to be threatened, and it's something that none of us can take for granted. Perhaps one of the benefits of this war in Ukraine is the fact that the West is more united than ever, and perhaps a new rivalry of East meets West, not a Cold War, East versus West, not a Cold War, but a rivalry that is essential to the future of peace and prosperity for all of us around the world. With us today, we have with us Nick Greco, our political analyst, Nick P.O.D, Mark Lee will be joining us soon. And guys, I hope you're happy. And Mark Lee, I sort of spun that together. I have a terrible headache today, but I think I came out pretty good. It's hard to give a monologue in 2 minutes, but basically what I was saying was awaking the sleeping giant and the fact that Europe is now more united than ever. And does this actually strengthen this whole notion of East versus West? That we've got the United States and Europe motivated, NATO motivated, we're sending supplies, we're sending ammunition, and now you've got Russia, right? And I didn't talk about energy and oil production and things like that, but Germany did has now said they want to cut off the Nord Stream pipeline. Maybe we can do more to cut off oil exports, from Russia or importing oil. And who knows what's going to happen, right? But I'm going to go ahead and open up to the panel to reflect on my monologue and talk a little bit about global affairs today. But let's start with the war in Ukraine.
Well, it seems like we're definitely in the middle of as you said, a Cold War, but it seems more East versus West, as Russia is apparently doing what it is doing in the sense of an invasion and all of that. I'm actually going to toss it to Chris because I actually read an interesting article yesterday, and I'd love to know his thoughts about it. And it had to do with something that Sasha said we may have to face, which is the possibility of World War III and a nuclear threat. And I was thinking that the bases would be the primary targets that we have such a horrible thing and all of that, thinking like, of course, here in North Carolina and Texas and where a lot of the bases were. But as I was reading, and I know it's not always the most reliable source, Coro and some of the questions that were going on in there, they were actually saying that 3 states that are actually, so what some people would say are in the middle of nowhere, would probably be where the targets are, because apparently that's where we placed a lot of our stuff, that being Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming. So I was just wondering your thoughts about that, because apparently that maybe Los Angeles and New York and some of the bigger cities might not have as much to worry about as those areas there. And apparently we did that intentionally, because that is also where there is less population. But I was just wondering, as a military person, what your thoughts are, and was that an accurate thing that I was reading in that publication? Because like I said, it was an internet, and I was happened to be dealing with some family situations. Actually, I may talk to Chris about that as well, because it's actually within his realm of expertise and everything. But that being said, I was just wondering your take on that the article that I read, actually, to be perfectly honest, early this morning.
Well, back in the 1960s, now there's still a NORAD. There's North American Air Defense Command, which is made up of Canada and the United States. And basically what it does is in the 1960s, they had a thing called DEWS, DEWS, which was the Distance Early Warning System. And basically what it was over-the-horizon radar that was set up in different locations so that they could detect any launching of ICBMs over the pole. And the interesting about it was that we found that, why would we place – now we do have some in Kansas, but why would we place missiles in our central United States? We could place them at the northern part, right on the Canadian border, so that when we launch them, we basically launch them over the pole, which, other than Shaq and the rest of flat earthers believe, is the shortest distance between, the Montana, the northern area, and the Soviet Union. So basically what happened is the Soviet Union felt the same way. So they put their missiles in the basically same location. So when they hit us, they'll hit us over the poles. Everyone thinks, they're going to hit us over Europe. Nah, they're gonna hit us over the poles, because that's a lot easier for them to do, and it makes a lot less fuel that you have to expend. Same thing with bombers. If you're going to take B-52 bombers, you don't want to put those B-52 bombers in Florida or California or Texas. You want to put them in a northern tier so that they can just fly right over the poles, and then they just they use less fuel and they arrive to their targets a lot quicker. So that's why a lot of things, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana. I knew personally some missileers that would travel by helicopter from their base to their missile site, and they would because they couldn't get there anywhere else. So they would go by helicopter there, and they would sit there for 8 days, 9 days, whatever amount of days it was, and then they would be helicoptered back to their base. So it was the missiles are still active, they're still there, and most of them are solid fuel, so you don't have to worry about fuel decomposition and corrosion. The Atlas missiles, the original ones in the 1960s, had a lot of problem with liquid fuel, because it would literally corrode through the metal, and then there'd be a problem with the silos. So they replaced all those with Minutemen, in the late 1960s, 70s, and they were solid fuel rockets, so you didn't have to worry about corrosion from the fuel. So all these things, that's the reason why they do that. That's the reason put them in Montana, places like that. They never put any in Alaska. There's none in Alaska. Now, if I were the Soviet Union, which I call Russia now because really it is the Soviet Union. Basically, what they would do is they would target all the missile sites first to try to get that, and then do a first strike, and then we couldn't retaliate. But even if they hit every single missile site, which is daggum near impossible, we'd still have the ability to put bombers up before their first strike would take place. So, I mean, there's a lot of pre-warnings there that I'm not at liberty to discuss that exist that are beyond that.
Yeah,
So,
it makes a lot of sense and everything. And I know we're definitely going to deal with more of what's going on in NATO, and apparently NATO troops are going to the Western Ukraine. But before we get to that, I do want to get to one of Nick's other favorite topics as well, because Nick is always trying to remind us that COVID-19 is not over. And apparently there was an article today that COVID-19 has shut down plants in China, hitting the Apple supplier Foxconn and different automakers. So, we oftentimes talk about that other major power, China, and apparently that is what is going on in their country, because a surge in COVID-19 cases has led the Chinese manufacturing hubs, Shenzhen and Changchun, to lock down in recent days, halting production at many electronic and auto factories in the latest threat to the world's already battered supply chain. So I was just wondering, Nick's thoughts about that, because apparently the government has placed some of those cities into lockdown for at least a week. As a matter of fact, they said that in Shenzhen, they've definitely done it for at least a week, and said everyone in the city would have to undergo 3 rounds of testing after 86 new cases of domestic COVID-19 infections were detected yesterday. So while China's case numbers are tiny by global standards, the country had adopted a zero COVID-19 policy that aimed at nipping all outbreaks in the bud through testing and a lockdown. And we do know that we've been having, testing, lockdowns, and everything else. And now we are opening widely up. I know that my job is talking about coming in this week in person and everything. I've done a couple of times during the time, but they're talking about 2 regular appearances, that being the job that I do in the Cultural Arts Center. I know that definitely Steve has been glad that he's back at work and all along those lines, but it does look like maybe we're jumping the gun too quick, because if China is an example, we may have to recede back into the house and all of that. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but that could be the case. And I was just wondering your take on this, since you've been one of the major ones yelling at us that, hey, COVID-19 isn't over. So I'd love to hear your takes on this based on what's coming out of China.
Yeah, a couple things. 452 people died apparently yesterday. So like I say, you take these numbers in the United States and you annualize them, and you're talking, roughly about 100,000 people, and it's over 1,000. And I know that the right-wing radicals wanted to basically dismiss this using apologies. But I'm going to also throw another fire into the wrench here, dealing with your friend Zelensky. Because remember, there's his story, her story, and the truth. Apparently, Time magazine said Mandelov, one of the oppositions to Zelensky, that our friend Zelensky actually shut down about a year ago 3 television channels that were run by our friends, his loyal opposition, because he didn't want to hear any opposition. Okay, then Zelensky seized this person's assets. Okay, now this is all reported in Time magazine. All you have to do is look at February 21st Time magazine. So wait a minute, this goes back to his story, her story, then there's the truth. What did Zelensky do to incite the bear? Well, he basically took the press down in Ukraine. In other words, the opposition press down, because they were, quote, liars. Now, I'm supposed to suffer because of his spat with Vladimir Putin. Now, why is that? Why are people being killed because Zelensky starts a war? I don't know. And why is it that part is not, other than Time magazine, February 21st, 2022's article on that, not being discussed by the press? It's the same reason we're poo-pooing coronavirus. It's just not interesting anymore. So that's the reason coronavirus is over with. It's not because people aren't dying. People are dying faster than the rate in Ukraine. It's because it's not interesting anymore to the press, and the right wing doesn't want to hear it anymore. So why is it that we don't discuss Zelensky and some of the stuff he does? Because that doesn't feed into our narrative. So I'd like to hear from our friend who used to live in Odessa that's about to be attacked, Sasha, who may be up to date more than I am about Zelensky's aggression and why this isn't being discussed by the West.
Well, I guess Zelensky just simply wants to wipe out Russia from this earth. And at this rate, when there are 20,000 volunteers, all of them, or most of them, are experienced operatives in hotspots around the world. And they have all the arms and equipment, and each one of them is worth 15 Russian soldiers who are really defective, don't know how to fight, and good for nothing. Just they're good only when they're dead. So what's happened is that if that number from 20,000 will explode to 50,000, and it will take possibly 2 weeks. That's the end of Russian army. That's the end of Russia. In fact, NATO and US and all world will have to beg Zelensky not to invade Russia and not to take over Moscow. They will have to back him. And I don't think Zelensky will listen to them, because it's not, you know what, they don't take him into NATO, right? But now not Zelensky needs NATO. NATO needs Zelensky, because Ukrainian army proved that, unlike NATO, who are just talking and talking and talking, and can sometimes occasionally fight a little war in Iraq or Afghanistan or some places like this, or US can fight in Grenada. Okay, US, they did so well in Grenada, they just got it over. Ukrainian army just takes over supposedly one of the strongest army in the world and makes a massacre out of it. There is no way in the world it's easier to fly to Jupiter than to take over Kiev. It will be 100 times more difficult than Stalingrad. And Germans, who had a very good army at the time, they just failed. They couldn't take Stalingrad. No one in the world can take Kiev. That's basically the end of story. Yeah. And what Zelensky confiscated this few oligarchs here and there, that's okay by me. If he decided that he needs to do that, just go and do it. No problem.
Well, apparently he did it. See, this was the thing.
Great. That's great.
What I'm getting is that what he did is he came in and he took by force 3 television channels.
It's brilliant.
In Ukraine.
No, there are no rules in this.
Yeah, I understand. He did this way before.
If he was strong enough to do it,
okay.
Fine.
What would happen if Biden decides I'm going to seize Fox News? What would Chris do? He would go crazy.
Yeah, but hold on a second. Hold on a second. Wait a second, though, because apparently the Russian prosecutors have come up with another brilliant idea, and we're going to see what happened with this idea, because apparently, and this happened, I think, earlier today or yesterday, Russian prosecutors have issued warnings to Western companies that are still in Russia. They are saying that they are going to arrest corporate leaders there who criticize the government or to seize assets of companies that withdraw from the country, according to people familiar with the matter. So prosecutors have delivered the warning in the past week to companies, and some of these are some very major companies, including companies that we know quite well, the International Business Machines Corporation, KFC owner Yum Brands Incorporated, Procter & Gamble, McDonald's, and Coca-Cola. So if we're thinking about a world war and everything, wouldn't that almost like lead to, or definitely make it almost a necessity if we get like a major American leader that is a corporate leader arrested by the Russian prosecutors? Because that's what they're saying they're going to do. And they said they might also seize assets.
All what they can confiscate is office furniture, office supplies, and that's about it. I think they would be better off to take over all the escort girls who were serving top executives. That's probably the only asset that these companies still have.
To get back what I mentioned last week on NPR radio distinctly had a distinct report from the UE, right? That basically said, hey, or EU, that basically said that the reason they didn't allow Ukraine in the EU before the invasion was because EU's corruption index was so high that they couldn't do it. Even the individual that was stationed in Ukraine said they're making headway, but the corruption is still very high. Obama president, Biden vice president, stopped military aid to Ukraine because of that corruption. When Trump brought it up, I mean, dummy Trump brought up a distinct individual, but if he would have said, hey, look, you got to get the corruption down before we can give you the military aid, then that would have been okay. But to bring up Biden's name, everyone went nutsy cuckoo. But Obama and Biden did that before the whole situation happened, and that was fine. So,
well, I think that it's real quickly. I want to just go back to the Europe thing. I lost a moment there. Let's go back. So, do you all agree that if there's any silver lining in this war, and once again, we pray for the tragedies in Ukraine and all the deaths, but do you think moving forward, this could be a unification of Europe that we haven't seen in a long time? And do you think that's good for the world order? A unified West that would enable us to use more of our resources in the U.S. for averting China and Asia Pacific. I'll start with you, Chris, and then Sasha.
Okay. So bottom line is, how much is Germany spending on defense right now? How much are they? The way they do it is you must spend, NATO's rules are you must spend 2% minimum of your GDP as a member of NATO. Germany has never done that, since like the 1960s, 70s. They in fact, they went as low as 1.0% of their GDP. They're now 1.4% of GDP. And they're saying on the news, they're spending 2%. They went up from 1% to 2% on defense spending. 1% to 2%. 100% increase. But they're still making plenty of money off of goods and commercial aspects and everything else. And they've now spent 1% more in their defense spending. Where do they get most of that funding? Where do they get most of the equipment and everything else? U.S. forces stationed in Germany. And that's how they do that. The same with, France kicked us out. So, but they spend less than that. I mean, actually, I shouldn't say it. They actually spend more than Germany on defense spending. But if Europe is going to be united, they're going to need to pay their fair share. And they're going to need to start getting NATO up to that fair share.
I want to throw another monkey in the wrench here, and this goes to
that
Trump.
Makes a lot of sense. The thing I was going to add, and I'd love to hear, and I think Sasha has alluded to it before, is that Russia and China are very unified, or at least they seem to be unified at everything. And I think even Nick has brought that up as well, and that is a very powerful alliance that exists. When it comes to the European alliance, part of it is we're talking about them paying their fair share. And I do agree that people that are going to be part of an alliance should pay their fair share. But there's also been, as we've said, in many of those countries, a rise in nationalism. So I'm wondering, is this going to be a temporary unification? Because we do know that has happened in the past, where there are temporary unifications when you have a common enemy, but after that common enemy threat is neutralized or it is no longer around, then do you go back to your divisionary factors and all of that? And that has been something that has been part of the European lingo, I would argue, for centuries, if not definitely decades. I mean, we saw it with Brexit, we saw it with a couple of other things as well. So is there a possibility of having a truly unified Europe? I mean, I know there have been talks about having a unified Africa. I don't know if there's ever been talks of a unified Asia. And is it even doable in this day and time? Or is it something that will never happen because countries, as a general rule, are going to want to defend their own interests and to protect their own culture and all along those lines. But I guess I'll toss it off to Sasha, since he has lived in not just one country, but two countries. I've only had the privilege of being an American citizen and everything, haven't been a citizen in multiple countries and haven't done enough world travel, but I do have some opinions on these matters. So Sasha, what is your thoughts about this unified Europe? Is it just going to last as long as they're fighting Russia, or is it going to be something that can stand the test of time? And will we get like the European dollar or something along those lines? Because I do remember those conversations also.
I think the world, not just Europe, but all world has been unified in seeing the horror what is Russia and Putin in particular and all the Russian civilization means as a threat to all world. It doesn't matter you're not a country and you're not a country, and just beside the point. The problem is that Russia in the last few years, and I've explained already on some of the programs why, I can very briefly to repeat simply, that they are now, Putin is right now indoctrinated by teachings of Russian nationalists such as Professor Dugin and some well-known writers like Perkhanov and so on. And but they've existed before 30 and 40 years ago, but they never been influential. They never had a necessary platform to offer their views of the world or so on. But their teachings, and some of it means that Russia has its own way, very different from Europe, from the United States. It has its own way, and it must go ahead with its on its own by its own way, and that alone have been adopted by Putin and his so-called Petersburg friends, mafia. You can call it any way you feel better, and so now it's become a almost as a religion. So if we're dealing with religious people, so imagine what's happened if in charge of Russia was, say, Ayatollah. But Putin is even worse than Ayatollah in Iran, for example, simply because he has so-called red button or so on, which I don't believe that it will ever work. It just will fail, like everything what Russia does, it fails. Russia has not brought to the world anything beside war, death, suffering, struggles. That's what Russia expertise. Can you tell me what is it Russia produces that people need and they want really to buy? Nothing. They cannot produce bicycle. They cannot produce shoes. They cannot produce anything of meanings, of substance. Nothing. They are people of war, and they have to be stopped now. When in charge, they have Ayatollah at its best level.
Right.
See
Yeah,
what happened next.
Hey,
Well,
Steve, I think we're going to have a contest as to whether Sasha hates Russia more or Chris hates France more. I think it's a very close race and everything.
well, I tell you, it just goes to show you
I wouldn't use hate, just dislike a lot.
how divided the world is. So, I mean, well, this is a good discussion for us to continue to have about Europe, but I wanted to bring it up today for something else to consider. And of course, on the international show, which hopefully I can join this Friday, we can, or any Friday, we'll talk about that issue. But as we look at real quickly, just a quick state of the war update in Ukraine, I just want to give a couple of remarks here. Um, Russian warplanes have struck a base near the border with Poland, killing at least 35 people, the Ukrainian officials say. Russian forces are stepping up bombardments aimed at devastating the cities and towns of Ukraine. And the Russian forces detained the mayor of Melitopol, prompting hundreds of outraged residents to protest. And a couple of other things to think about. The U.S. has announced it will send an additional 200 million in weapons and equipment to Ukraine, and few of the products that Americans are boycotting are actually Russian. But really nothing new. The war continues to wage on, and it is drawing out. And we got to give these Ukrainians credit for fighting and resisting. But here we are in what, week 3 of this crisis, maybe 4, I can't remember. But any thoughts, gentlemen, on the war in Ukraine?
Well, just my opinion on the whole thing. Basically, what's happening is that by taking Lvov, whatever you want to call it, Lviv, I think is what they call it now. But basically, that was, again, in the Cold War, that used to be a major bomber base for the Soviet Air Force, and Kiev used to be a major air defense district for the Soviet Air Force. And the reason was because of the proximity to the NATO countries. I mean, if they wanted short strikes, they could take it from Lvov or they could take it from Kiev. So it was they're very strategically, they're strategically good, and Kiev's on a river, major river. I mean, all these things, it's situations that they need to take Kiev. Now, whether or not they do, well, I'll tell you one thing: they're going to take Kiev. They're not going to be able to hold it. I mean, the Ukrainians are like the Yugoslavians. They're going to fight to the last person. I mean, this is their homeland. This is their city. As Sasha pointed out, Stalingrad was a house-to-house type situation in the wintertime. Now, the Russian forces are acclimated to wintertime, but there's no acclimation to -2 degrees, to temperatures and everything else. It's very hard to fight in that stuff. Heck, I was in Germany one time. We were doing an exercise, and I think it was -2. We had parkas on and everything, mucklucks and all that stuff. Yeah, we were freezing. We were freezing our butts off. I thought, this is nuts. Why would anybody want to fight in the wintertime? But you fight when you fight. So it's that's going to be a really, really hard thing for them to do. And the Russians are going to call sapping, SAPPING. They're just going to sap over and over and over again. After a while, when you cannot go outside because you're going to get basically shot in the head by a sniper, it's very, very frustrating for the occupying forces. So it's going to be they're going to take. There's no doubt in my mind they're going to take Lviv. They're going to take Kiev. They're going to take those cities. Whether they can hold them or not, or whether they want to hold them or not, I have no idea. But that's gonna be hard.
Chris, this is a typical stupid European war. Rich people start it and poor people suffer. Okay. This was a fight between Zelensky and Putin that Zelensky instigated over a year ago by seizing 3 of the television stations, and his ratings were plummeting. And this is all reported about a year ago. His ratings were plummeting from 70% down to 40% because they kept broadcasting anti-Ukrainian, pro-Russian garbage. Okay, so
Nick, may I ask you, did he seize Russian stations or Ukrainian stations?
He seized Ukrainian stations
that
that were owned by a Russian oligarch. Okay, that was close to Vladimir Putin, and then he seized this Russian oligarch's personal property too. This was in February of 2021 because he was seeing his ratings plummet. And this is not unusual on all wars. Rich people get in a fight, poor people get killed. And this is what happened here too. And then the media all pushes either right or left, trying to draw us in more of their battles, Chris. This happened in World War I, happened in World War II, and now it's happening again.
It's happening
I really
again.
get sick and tired of it, because the thing is, the poor people that are in Odessa, the poor people in Kiev, the Russians military don't know what's going on. They've all been duped by their country leaders. Okay, they've been duped by Vladimir Putin and Zelensky that this is all about nationalism. It's all garbage. Okay, it's all instigated by these two people going at each other. And the thing is, there's no reason to fight. It's same with World War I. It was a rich person's war, poor people suffer. And now you're seeing it again. You're seeing it right here in Ukraine in the modern 21st century. The first thing they do, the first casualty of war is truth. They shut down the stations, and that's what they did.
So you do really believe that Ukrainians are fighting furiously without even concern for their own lives, their wives, children, elderly people, just to retain property of the Russian oligarchs in hands of Zelensky?
No, they're fighting because, see, they're the casualty of war, Sasha. They're fighting because now Russia says, well, we're going to take over your house, which Russia has no business doing. You know that. In other words, Russia has no business being in Ukraine with their army trying to take people's houses. That's the reason they're fighting, because that's all they have is their house, their land, their country. So you
Nick, I
can't
got
blame
enough
them for fighting. But the people who started it was Zelensky and Putin. Those are the
No,
guys that
Nick,
need
please don't misrepresent the facts. The war started by Putin on February 24.
Right.
That's it. At the end of story. There is no 23rd February or 25th.
It started in 2014.
It's 24th of February. This date will be for next foreseeable future the most important date in the modern history.
Hey.
February 24th. And all this, what you are talking about, television stations and some property of oligarch, what is this, swimming pool or whatever Zelensky took over. Come on, this is pure nonsense. I'm not talking about that Putin took Crimea away from Ukraine. That's okay. Well, he you know what? He was able to do that. He's done it. Okay?
But
Now,
remember, this
Zelensky
was,
could take over this stupid station, this which were lying through their teeth. Okay, Russians can do it in their country. The people are zombies in Russia. They're
That's right.
finished. It's no longer human material.
See what you did, Nick?
It's not.
Hold on a second.
See what you did?
Hold on a second. But I have a question, because we said
I know what I
that
did.
the Russians are zombies. But I have a question for Nick and for Sasha, because I was looking online and I was looking at a couple of other places as well, and I'm seeing entire, like, big time protests in Russia. I don't think that I've seen protests like this against a war, and Chris might agree with this, since Vietnam. Because like I said, when I saw some of these protests, I'm going like, I have not seen this many people against a war since the American war against Vietnam, and the protests that were going on there, where some people even ran across the border to Canada and everything. But am I seeing too much into this? Because when I'm looking at these pictures and they're coming from like social media and everything, I'm seeing a whole lot of folks in Russia that are like, wait a minute, we're not quite as much of a zombie as Sasha is saying we are, because we actually are upset at being in this war, and we think that Putin has lost his mind. That's what I'm seeing, but maybe I'm misreading it, because I saw a whole lot of folks in different major cities in Russia that were like putting their own lives at risk, because they're going like, I've seen enough. I'm not going to go into the streets.
Well, I think you're saying the right things, Mark. The people in Russia don't want this war. Could you imagine if Putin goes, we're going to invade St. Petersburg, Russia now and take it over? I mean, it's stupid. It's a very stupid war. So the thing is, of course, they don't want it. But unfortunately, the way the Russian government works is, here's what they do. They arrest all those people that are protesting. And I think they arrested 3,500 or 5,000. I mean, that's what they do. It's kind of a brutal, you can't, it's my way or the highway type of deal over there. But yeah, I would agree that the Russian people are not interested in a war with Ukraine. You know.
Well, and the media here is the media has moved from reporting the news to making the news. They want a war. They want NATO to get in there. You know why? Because then they can embed with the troops and they get their Pulitzer prizes. And
ratings
the ratings
through the roof. Yeah, ratings are through the roof. Our number one TV show right now on the IBM TV network is actually Sasha's, because Russia, China, Ukraine, just people eat it up. Okay, yeah. They eat up the war. In other words, it's one of the biggest media things in the world is to create a war. Yeah. Your ratings go check on YouTube. You'll see, even though we don't do it well on YouTube, we do on other places. You're going to see anything that deals with the war has millions of views. You know, war is a great media tool. So what they do is they flame the fuel. They take fuel and they dump it on this. And if you think about it, what started the war? It was seizing media operations in Ukraine about a year ago. In other words, the thing is, because what they did is that Zelensky goes, we're just going to shut off my opposition, which was smart in his way. But, and you can read the articles about it. He took a risk. What was the risk? Well, you're seeing the results of the risk. In other words, it's gone the other way. So there's always, remember, his side, her side, and the truth. And the real problem is
But
what
Chris
You're
and
never
everybody on
gonna-
the panel, there's another issue that is coming up, and I'd love to know y'all's thoughts about this as well. Speaking of news articles, this was an interesting one that I found in the Wall Street Journal, which is apparently there is some possibilities. It was actually an opinion piece, but I'd love to know y'all's thoughts about this. The fact that with the war going on and with all of this stuff happening, that the lovely almighty dollar could be in trouble because, as the editorial said and everything, think of the U.S. dollar as the thread or even the duct tape that binds the layers of the world together. And nearly 60% of the 12.8 trillion in worldwide currency reserves are dollars. So the question that they were asking is the dollar in danger because of what's going on in this war, particularly since a lot of foreign reserves are frozen and a lot of other things are going on. And I know that Sasha's involved in the stock market. I'm pretty sure that Nick is as well. So is there any concerns that y'all have, and I haven't read the entire article, but just kind of scanned over it, about this possibility of the almighty dollar being in trouble as well?
Well, that's even more reason now to hit Russia and possibly China. If China is going to try to help Russia, then obviously China, the hardest it's possible because the West is on decline. And a few years, Russia and China and a few other countries, they will create their own way of exchanging goods by passing US dollar and euro, and it will lead to a further decline of US dollar, and with all the liabilities of United States, it simply cannot afford it. It just can't, because there are well over $200 trillion of unfunded liabilities, including Medicare and Social Security funds. So US, while it's still very strong, at least militarily, it has to strike now. And that doesn't matter, it's nuclear war or non-nuclear war, because if US is losing its supremacy, it's losing, the dollar is losing its value. It's even worse than nuclear war. The US will be well over $200 million in unfunded liabilities, trillion dollars, sorry, in unfunded liabilities. And US as a country will not longer exist anyway. So just while you're still strong, do something. Oh, now you're trying to hedge your bets. You're not going to supply this fighter jets from Poland. You're not going to induce a red line. But they're already bombing on near Polish border already. NATO will get involved in this war. Right now, you are enjoying, oh, let's Ukraine take over Russia. But Ukraine did a job. It just showed the Russian army is full of shit. It's not really an army. It's a young 17, 18 years old conscripts who don't even know that they're on Ukraine. They were told that they're going to some training exercise or so on. And all of a sudden, they've been captured by Ukrainians. They say, what's happened? Where are we? I mean, that.
Yeah.
Now, there are quite a lot of Russian pilots were captured. That's a different story. All of them are officers, and they are telling the truth, really, what they were told, what Russia is doing, and so on and on and on. Oh my God, Zelensky got some asses from some stupid television stations. Okay, let's go and war and bomb Kiev and do that. Guys, get out of there. You all will be killed. There will be no captured anymore. All of them will be just killed.
The thing we didn't talk about, but I think it's we talked about, Sasha, thank you for that insight. And, the ruble down 40%, what's going to happen to the US dollar, inflation, but the energy crisis. And I think we'll devote some time this show to maybe this week talking about it. Some economists say that what's going on is very similar to what happened in the late 70s when the Saudi Arabia and the Arab countries stopped oil production or selling oil to the United States, largely because we were supporting Israel in the Israel war. And there's this fear that cutting off the Nord Stream pipeline, cutting off oil, exports from Russia is going to catapult prices to raise prices so much we're going to be in an energy crisis. But then I've heard some economists argue that this perhaps could be an opportunity for the United States to We still are producing a lot of oil. Really getting creative in terms of an energy strategy where, in the short term, we have to develop enough fossil fuels to get through our immediate energy needs, but also transitioning to a long-term, energy policy that's focused on renewables. And this could be good for the U.S. because of the jobs we would be creating in kind of new energy, new technologies. I don't know where you all stand by that. I feel like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. I mean, the question is, are we going to have an energy crisis or not? And also, how are we going to produce? And I've heard Fareed Zakaria say that, saying that, well, we could make it easier logistically for Europe to get natural gas from different sources. We could produce even more oil and natural gas. We could actually lift up our production so that we're not dependent on, um, and I'll give you an example. One thing that I find amazing that we often don't talk about is during President Ford's administration, how America developed fuel economy standards for cars. And we were able to actually develop, you saw the beginning of developing cars that were more fuel efficient, that would actually save and reduce carbon emissions. And during this time, we were able to take measures where we were less dependent on foreign oil, right? So I don't know where you all think, talk about this. I'm trying to, as a
But Steve, I guess one of the questions I've got to ask, and I guess it's for everybody here on the panel, is that in some way, is this whole fight kind of pushing us to, because there was a movement and there was a movement that was going on for a while to get away from coal and some of the other energies that are considered harmful to nature and all of that, and to go into more of a what they call clean energy, whether that's solar or whether that's wind or a number of other things. But if we're not able to get as much of our gas and other things from other countries, isn't that pushing us away from the whole clean energy discussion? And some people may be perfectly fine with that, but I know some of the people, speaking of middle America, as we were talking about earlier, that are in those areas where coal is at and everything, and they might have been seeing some relief, including on some Native American land, then they're wondering, are we not going to be pushed back to a whole nother coal and oil discussion, which we know can be the more hazardous of the ones that are developed and all of that, and less around clean energy? So I guess I'll toss that off to Chris, and then maybe Sasha's got some thoughts as well. But are we being maybe forced back into the coal and oil discussion, which may push us away from clean energy?
Okay, so so you cannot produce steel with anything but fossil fuels and nuclear energy. You cannot produce steel. Know those windmills that are flying around? All this? You cannot produce that without coal, without oil. You can't. Can't be done. They've tried it. Can't be done. Now, they've done a couple of recycling areas where they've recycled aluminum using some solar power, and that seems to be okay. But you cannot manufacture steel. Cannot manufacture steel except with fossil fuel or nuclear energy. That's it. You can't do it with solar. You can't do it with wind, and you can't.
And that's a great. I'll make this point before we hand to Sasha, and it's something I've been thinking about. But I think that in and of itself is the dilemma that we are in. We today do not have the adequate renewable energy, green economy infrastructure ready in place where we could abandon all of our dependence on fossil fuel and go. So it could go, electric vehicle charging stations, for example, not enough solar power, not enough wind power, right? So how do we have it? That's what I said earlier, a strategy short term where we have to depend on fossil fuels, like Chris said, to manufacture steel, to power our manufacturing plants, to do all the things that we need, to provide the abundant water and infrastructure. In the long term, the transition needs to be to a long-term renewable energy strategy, in my opinion, which could be good for the United States because we are a leader in renewables in terms of the research we're doing, whether it's agriculture, ag science, infrastructure, water systems, wind, solar, electric vehicle, but the infrastructure just isn't there. So if we went and abandoned and said we're going all renewable, like Chris said, how are we gonna power our plants? How are we going to, Sasha, do you think that's a good point? I mean, we have to be also realistic in terms of the short-term energy policy and the long-term energy policy.
Let me ask you. If you are terminally ill, would you worry about what's happened 15 years from now in on your street project to build a supermarket, and you are going to vote yes or no when you are going to die probably next 2 weeks? Probably not. You wouldn't even think about it. So for now, for all practical reasons and consideration, I would scrap all the green so-called energy projects. I would stop financing of all these dumbheads who are just wasting people money and just make it somebody by as Greta Thunberg, a multimillionaire. I would just stop all this nonsense. Enough is enough. Just get into real life, get production of your own oil and gas in incredible quantities. As the oil will go down to $15 a barrel, the gas will go down to 35 cents per liter. That's what you have to do. Don't be so dumb. Enough is enough, please.
Right.
I hear what you're saying, Sasha, but on the counter side of that, I actually had the privilege yesterday, well, not yesterday, on Friday after our news show, of hanging out with a good friend of mine who has actually got, I think he's waiting for his second, because he's definitely, his wife is running the first one, electric cars. And he's actually enjoying quite a bit of the money that he is saving off of gas because of that electric car that they've got and all of that. And they're doing quite well with that electric car. So definitely they've got a whole thing around the infrastructures as well, because that is something else that I know that people have been talking about is the infrastructures. And I know that there was even a person involved in the political campaign who is now head of our, believe, transportation, that being Pistol Pete and all of that. So I was wondering your take on that, Steve, when we think about the infrastructure, because a lot of cities, including those in Wake County and Durham, are developing charging stations so that more and more people can get to the electric car, which apparently is more economical.
Well, I do think it's very important for us in the money that's coming in from the federal government in the infrastructure plan. And I know there was more plan, the Build Back Better plan, to get more money coming in to build these electric charging stations. And whether that money is, Secretary Buttigieg was on 60 Minutes last night, so I would encourage everyone to watch that. Very fascinating show about, his take on infrastructure, repairing American infrastructure, how this is the largest investments in infrastructure since the New Deal and even the Eisenhower administration. And electric vehicle, for example, from a policy perspective, how is that money going to get from the federal government to the state DOTs and then eventually to the cities, like where I sit in government, where we can deploy electric vehicle charging stations more often, because the president wants 500,000 and we only have 43,000 in right now in the U.S. Right, so until we get more charging stations, you can buy all the electrical vehicles you want. You can get subsidies to make it cheaper to buy American electric vehicles, but if you don't have the charging stations, people aren't going to drive it. And that electric vehicle is just one part of it. That also means the whole green infrastructure. That you need infrastructure in order to do this, right? But I would say, and the final point is, you need shovel-ready projects. And I've said this time and time again. We've seen a lot of big figures. 5 years from now, 4 years from now, 3 years from now, are we going to see more charging stations in Durham, more charging stations in Warsaw and Cary, more solar panels around, right? Or
you got to bring down the cost of the car, though, Steve. You got to bring down the cost of the car. The cost of the car, if I sit back and I do an economic feasibility on whether I want a gas-powered car or electric-powered car, I take a look at how much I'm going to spend more for an electric-powered car. And then I take a look at how much I'm going to spend for gas, even at $4 or $5 a gallon. And I sit back and I go, screw this. I'm going to get a gas-powered car, because in the long run, if I own the car 10 years, or if I own it 5 years, I'm still going to save money overall from rather than paying $20,000 or $30,000 more for an electric car. I can buy this thing for $15,000, and I'm good for the next whatever, even at $4 or $5 a gallon. That's what the policymakers need. They need to show people that, hey, this is going to be a cheaper car for you to drive, a cheaper car for you to buy, a cheaper car for you to maintain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. They definitely have to show that it's going to be cheaper and all of that. But yeah, like I said, my friend was definitely, I think, waiting for that second car to come along and all of that. I was just going to bring in a news item from last week. And speaking of the possibility of war, sometimes when we have wars, then the ships get lost and other things get lost. And apparently last week, they found a well-preserved wreck of an explorer. It was actually Ernest Shackleton's ship Endurance, which sank in the Atlantic waters and disappeared undersea way back in 1915. And it was found nearly 2 miles beneath the ocean. So, we're always out there exploring the ocean. And apparently we found a ship that was out there, that was a long time ago, like 107 years ago and all of that. So, Chris, I guess I'll toss that to you just really quickly. I know it's one of those little quick feature stories, but is that something that you're amazed by as a past military person when we find these ships that are in the middle of the ocean many decades and sometimes centuries later?
And the thing is that back in, I'm going to say it was the 1970s, there was a Soviet submarine that was lost, basically that was that sank as a result of an explosion. And went to Howard Hughes and got him and got what they call the Glomar Explorer. And using that technology, now this was the 1970s now, or 1980s, 70s, 80s, and was able to lower something to bring that submarine from 2 miles down or whatever it was, 2-3 miles down, and actually raise that submarine up into the ship, the Glomar Explorer. So it just amazes me that you got 2 miles down, 3 miles down. That's a the pressure on that is amazing. But it also the whole story about Shackleton is amazing. 200 miles or whatever he went over the ice to get his crew and himself to safety. So I think that's pretty cool. So it's a very, very interesting story.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, as we get ready for closeout, we have a few more minutes, but we have a lot to talk about this week. We'll continue our discussion of the war in Ukraine. Maybe focus our efforts on domestically what's going on. I haven't heard much about the U.S. Supreme Court nomination of Ketanji Jackson Brown to be our next Supreme Court justice. Continued focus on infrastructure as we get only 9 months away from the 2022 elections. Lots of stuff going on where we sit in North Carolina with millions of dollars, billions of dollars coming in for the U.S. Senate, for the United States congressional seats, and the primaries are on May 17th. So only time will tell where we go from here with, who's going to control a year from now the U.S. Congress and the U.S. House.
Yeah, but at least we're going to have an election because of what the Supreme Court decided, because there were still some questions about that. But it does look like we'll at least have a race for folks to vote on, because there was the whole question of redistricting and whether there were going to be fights against that and everything. And as of now, it looks like the elections are on here in North Carolina. And I want to say Pennsylvania was also said that they were on as well, because definitely there were some challenges there. But I think both of those states, the challenges have been turned back, so they will go ahead and have those elections.
That's right.
So it's on you. Is that right at the hour? So waiting for your closeout, Steve.
Well, as I watch the events unfold in Ukraine, and I look at the constant battle between democracy and autocracy, I would be remiss if I didn't think about one of my favorite movies I've been watching on the Disney Plus streaming series, all of the Star Wars saga, from The Last Jedi to The Rise of Skywalker to all of the different shows that they have. And the one thing about the Star Wars series by George Lucas is this whole notion of good versus evil. And there was a scene when Luke Skywalker, the Jedi Master, told his nephew Kylo Ren, he said, "The rebellion has just begun. The war is not over. No, the rebellion is reborn. The war is not over. It has just begun. And I will not be the last Jedi." And I think in many ways, the same could be said for democracy. Democracy, I think Europe and the United States is saying today, is not dead. Democracy must continue to live. And Ukraine will not be the last democracy, just like Luke Skywalker was not the last Jedi, that we will fight for, that we will die for, that we will save. And I say that because I think if there's anything this war has taught us, the battle between good and evil, dictatorship, autocracy, and freedom and democracy will never end. It will be a constant battle. And perhaps this war in Ukraine has opened our eyes that we must not take our freedom and democracy for granted. So that's really my final quote, my final thought. Maybe a movie, The Last Democracy, just like The Last Jedi. But I do believe that we must continue to pray for the people of Ukraine. Thank you all so much. We'll be back tomorrow for another edition of Roku TV's World Edition. Thank you.